about five years ago, I think, maybe more than that. But she's with an entity called ReAMP, which is an entity that I've long kept an eye on because it's doing such innovative system organizing work. And Gail, just as a bit of introduction, you're in Wisconsin, is it? Is that?
Actually, no, I am. I might have been in Wisconsin when we first started working together, but I am now in Minnesota.
Okay, well, for people to know, that's sort of the central United States. And Gail, we're on a trek here. I know you're an outdoors person. What did you recently do outdoors that you can share with us?
Oh gosh. Well, I go for a hike most mornings, but it's been kind of a quiet winter. I usually like to go winter camping, but I didn't get out this year yet. So I don't have anything too exciting to share from super recent.
Okay, thanks so much. Let's just go delve into this story of ReAMP. And can you tell us about how it emerged? Well, we should first of all, maybe Johnny, we could just have the first ReAMP slide to show people what the entity is we're talking about right now, in terms of its purpose. So here we have the mission, and it's working in the Midwest in the United States. And it's got this mission, which is clearly a system building mission, connecting diverse perspectives, harnessing everyone's unique expertise in spaces for intentional strategy setting and building the capacity for excellent implementation. So this is a great example of what I would call a systems developing organization or a transformation catalyst. So let's have thanks for so much, Johnny. So let's just have a bit of a conversation here. So how we got to there. What was the origin story? Can you tell us the origin story of ReAMP?
Sure, yeah. So ReAMP started in 2004, and the idea was actually there was a foundation that was really interested in systems analysis for complex problems, and they were really interested in marrying systems analysis with a network approach, with the idea being that a problem that is truly complex needs sort of a complexity of relationships so that you can have a strategy that emerges and adapts over time. So you're sort of matching the complexity of the problem with the complexity of the capacity to improve the situation. And so this foundation was not like, everybody cares about climate change, but they weren't climate funders. They were interested in this particular question. And so they sort of put out an RFP, was like, hey, who's got a complex problem and who wants a network? And so the one that they ultimately chose was to deal with climate change in the Midwest of the United States. And at that time, actually, the focus was strictly on the electric power sector. Since then, it's become economy-wide. So I don't know how much blow by blow you want me to give, but that's sort of overall how we got started. And it was just at that time, it was I think it was 20 organizations with maybe 29 people that met for a year and did a systems analysis and came up with 4 strategic leverage points. One thing I will say before I pause is the motto of the ReAMP network is think systemically, act collaboratively. And so sort of what we mean by that, by thinking systemically, is we're not the people who are like, oh, look at that bad thing happening, let's go solve it. We're more like, look at this thing that's happening. What are the patterns that are creating that thing and other things like it? And how do we change those patterns? So that's kind of a summary of a little bit about how we think about things.
So when you first came together, these 20 organizations, were they all signed on to the MOU or the RFP, the request for proposals, or how did those 20 organizations come together? Do you know?
Well, here, my understanding is I don't know who was actually responding to that RFP. I'm not entirely sure which organizations it was, but no, they weren't all signed on to that RFP. They weren't all like, hey, we want to be a network. What happened was they coalesced around the idea of this topic and this location. And then there was, I think, some handpicking done of those organizations, which is something we could maybe get into a little bit later about how that has shaped the trajectory of ReAMP.
And what did they do when they came together? How did
Yeah.
they make sense
So
of what their pathway was?
yeah. So they did a year-long systems analysis, and it was a different time. We didn't have the same technology, and we didn't have as much kind of vocabulary and currency around the concepts of systems analysis, let alone networks. I mean, this really was, we were the only ones doing this so far as we knew. And in this particular way, obviously people have always thought systemically and people have always had networks. I'm sorry, the question I was
What was the activity they undertook?
Yeah.
They started doing
So we
a
actually,
year long.
so we actually hired, this was actually just before my time. I came on just after this, but ReAMP hired a consultant, a systems analyst, and a kind of a team. And it was kind of a combination of that person doing interviews and synthesizing things, people coming together as a full group and talking about things. Now, mind you, this was just for one sector that this year-long process took place. So then they did this whole big systems map, a causal loop diagram. I don't know if you guys are getting into the different.
We do have that on a slide, I think, right?
Oh yeah, you have you have the cartoon version of it, I think, like the simplified version, which is way better than the full diagram. Yeah, this is way better. This is kind of what it came down to was, yeah. So one of the things that I have found about systems analysis is often the place you arrive seems really obvious in retrospect. So I remember when I first came into ReAMP, people told me what this great big insight was. And I was like, right, that makes sense. Because what the insight was there was all of these coal plants being built out in the Midwest, over 100. And meanwhile, there was also a lot of wind being built. And so different people were working on different things. But the big insight people had after this whole year-long analysis was that you can't just build wind. You have to stop the coal from getting built, which seems totally obvious. But the reality was that wasn't what was happening. What funders wanted to invest in was building the solution, and people did not want to be the people who were fighting the bad. They were just, they thought, well, let the market take care of it. Let's do the positive stuff. And what the systems analysis showed people was that they had to stop these coal plants. And the other reason that people didn't want to stop the coal plants is they actually didn't believe you could stop the coal plants. And so it was that perspective and also the role of energy efficiency. Those were the, which was to this day is still the least, promoted aspect and one of the most important aspects of our work. So the key insight was you can't just fight for the good, you have to stop the bad. Again, seems totally obvious in retrospect, but that wasn't at all how things were being funded or run at the time.
Thanks, Gil. Just to introduce, this is a methodology that David Stroh is particularly apt at. It's called system dynamics mapping, and it shows the relationships. You can see on the bottom left-hand corner the explanation of the colors. But we'll share that with you later, and you can see it later. Johnny, can we get back to Gail now? So you did a systems analysis map, and you were about 20 when you started out. Those 20 who were they? Were they all
Okay, yeah.
NGOs or?
Yeah. Well, actually, I take that back. In that very first group, I think there was one person from industry, but when ReAMP coalesced, the decision was to have it all be nonprofit organizations. So NGOs, essentially, NGOs and foundations. But here's the thing: is the people who were in that room were primarily sort of the accepted experts, and that shaped our understanding of the problem, right? Because they were experts, but they weren't the only type of experts that we needed to have in the room. And so for a long time, as a result of that, ReAMP viewed climate change as primarily sort of a technical problem. And it took us a long time to understand that it is not primarily a technical problem. It is primarily a social and political problem with really important technical aspects. And again, seems totally obvious now, but that was not the perspective that people were bringing into that space.
Now you just slipped this by. Well, yes, it was NGOs, and foundations. But I mean, that's unusual to have NGOs and foundations working together.
Yes, so this was the other idea. So I mentioned this foundation that wanted to get us off the ground and did. So one of the other things that they were really interested in was thinking about this as an experiment in philanthropy. And so what they wanted to do was to bring foundations and NGOs together as equal partners in the space. And we developed protocols such as it being a no pitch zone. You couldn't check up on your grantees. There were a lot of things that were done, just constantly reminding people to treat each other as peers. Now, obviously that's a bit naive because at the end of the day, your funder is in the room and you're supposed to be arguing with them, which can be very challenging. But it actually worked okay for a while. But over time, that has really eroded, and we are now primarily, we do still have foundation members, but who is really in our strategy making space is primarily the NGOs.
Great. And what did you do to be able to, as a response, what was the solution that you developed?
The solution to which?
The social, political, and obviously technical problem. What was it that we've talked about what the system needs to bring about change. So what did you perceive? How did you identify what the system needed?
Yeah, so that's a great question because I'll answer this in a couple of steps. One is I actually don't think about, I try not to think about problems and solutions. I try to think about problematic situations and improvements, because in such a complex problem, there's so many dynamics. I think I tend not to have a solution mindset, but more of an improvement mindset. But anyway, so to sort of make that shift, one of the challenges we had was, I mentioned that this original systems analysis was a year-long process. People were very proud of the work they had done, and they were very proud that we were taking this approach where we weren't just chasing after whatever thing seemed relevant at the moment, but that we had the systems analysis that was informing our strategy. At the same time, I don't think there was one single person who went through that process that ever wanted to go through it again. And so we were in this challenge of the world changes, our understanding of the initial problem changes, the problem itself changes. We needed to constantly refresh our systems analysis, and our members were saying, no, I am not doing that. And so what we've done is we've tried different things to keep a systems and to have something that we can hold on to and say, this is our systems analysis, without making our members do something that they're refusing to do. So one of the things is investing in sort of systems practice capacity. So we run a systems thinking academy where people come and they learn how to do some of that causal loop diagramming. They learn different techniques for thinking about things from various perspectives, you know, just about interrelations, about system boundaries. So they learn some of that strategy making, and then we infuse that in everything we do into the network. So we try to keep our systems capacity high in the network and have it infuse all of the different aspects of the way people are convening and working together. The other thing we've done, which we tried this, there was another completely technical systems analysis. It was a very good technical systems analysis, but completely technical. The technical side, our members were really jazzed by, but it was just devoid of values, really. And so what we tried to do was we worked with that team, and we tried to push them a little bit farther. They gave us some tools that we could use to try to think about it. You know, I don't know about you all, but there was like a period of time where I think a lot of organizations were trying to use an equity lens to things, but it was still primarily the foundation was very technical. So we kind of went through a phase like that. And then ultimately, what we ended up doing and where we are still, I mean, we're always evolving, right? So again, we haven't solved this problem, but we're always evolving, is basically at one point, I think it was in 2017, we just planted our flag and we had this convening, and we just said, you know, we are not trying to, you know, meet our goal with an equity lens. What we are trying to do is equitably eliminate greenhouse gas emissions in the Midwest. So you can't say there's like an equity component to it. The thing is together. We're equitably eliminating greenhouse gas emissions. And so, you know, that's influenced who holds leadership, who we listen to, you know, what issues we work on. And then what we do is we do still have like written reports and analyses that come out, but we don't have sort of like an overall thing for the whole Midwest. We have, you know, like last year we put one out just for the power sector. This year we're putting one out on landfills, actually. So that's kind of, we just kind of keep it rolling, basically.
And how did you influence the foundation's strategy? Or how did the foundations get influenced by engaging with you?
Yeah, so initially they were really there as partners in the room. And as I've said, that has changed. And I have like some theories around this that are probably not vetted enough to like share publicly, but I've made like these little systems maps of what I think kind of why that's not the case. But it's quite interesting. So we do still have some funders who partner strategically, but mostly they just engage in the network by funding and by like reading about stuff. And then, you know, having side conversations with ReAMP staff, as opposed to being in the room when ReAMP members are actually making those, you know, those strategies. And so they get influenced because they know that our members are the ones on the ground who have a kind of knowledge that they're not going to get by, you know, reading the New York Times or whatever. And so they value what comes up from that membership. And that's kind of the main way that they get influenced, I would say. Again, most of them do attend our annual meeting, which is sort of the exception to what I was saying. That's a big place where a lot of strategy takes place.
Now, I'd understood at one time that there was identification between the foundations and the NGOs in the region about priority strategies or priority actions, and that the foundations agreed to organize their funding in support of those collaboratively identified actions. Is that a correct reading of what happened, at least at what certain point?
Time, yeah, where that was the case. That's right. And then also ReAMP has a re-granting pool itself. So one of the main ways this happened was funders would give to our re-granting pool, and then together we had a committee that would then award the grants. But it's also true that even outside of that space, they would try to align their strategies, but it was always the easiest way for them to do it was to give money to ReAMP, because when they were trying to align their strategies outside of that space, they just would run into problems with their trustees and so forth.
Okay. Sarah, did you have a question? No? Okay, let's just move to the next slide then to try to look at what I've tried to describe in terms of roles and exchanges in what has just been described. So this is the really sort of simple a way of thinking about climate solutions. Somebody's got money, somebody's going to implement a solution. So you give money and you get the solution delivered. And the next slide will show that there's actually quite a much more complex set of activities that have emerged here. Now, I drew this, Gail, just based upon your mission statement. So this is where these key activities came from. So at the top, we have the ReAMP principles. And these principles are ones that I had understood you have collectively committed to as integrating into your program area. Do you want to speak to those for a moment?
Sure. So the ReAMP principles, for those who don't know, they were created by a group of environmental justice activists in the ReAMP Mountains, and I want to say 1991. And what it was really them saying, look, if you as mainstream environmental organizations want to work with us, this is what needs to happen. And there's 6 principles. They include things like a commitment to bottom-up organizing, allowing people to speak for themselves, a commitment to self-transformation. I'm sorry, I don't have each one of them off the top of my head, but yeah, they're so that's we've committed to doing our best to live into those principles.
So this is just to note, is a common element of the success work when it's successful is a shared sense of values and principles. And now I saw that you're basically a diversity convener. That's when you create bridges across boundaries, it seems to me, of people who otherwise have trouble connecting.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And what's really interesting is that those connections happen among people that you wouldn't think you would need someone to bring together. So like all of the time, we will have, even 2 mainstream, environmental organizations working in the same state. And the way they start working together is because they meet each other in ReAMP and they start having real conversations. Like they'll be aware of each other's existence, but like they'll actually get to know each other and be like, oh, let's work together on this. So sometimes it's just the convening period, even if it's like groups that aren't really that different. It's that strong relationship over time. But yes, that is definitely true. So we have put a lot of thought and intentionality. We had, I don't know if you all have experienced this, but we sort of had, and maybe to a certain extent still have, but less so, sort of this perceived divide between our members that do like grassroots organizing versus the ones that do like top level policy. And it was always perceived as this divide. We've done a lot of work to help people see each other as part of the same system, working at different levers within the same system and necessary to each other. That has been really, really big. One other thing I'll say around this difference of like being able to build those connections and relationships that we have found really helpful is, so we're a network, we're spread across 9 states. We work in these, multiple issue areas. And one thing we have learned is to pay attention to what's happening at the periphery of those things and really sort of nurturing that space, because, well, as you guys know, as conservationists, it's those boundaries, right? Where forest meets meadow, where really, really interesting stuff can happen. And so it's the same, like sort of in those boundaries where there's someone who maybe has a foot in the climate door, but they're really interested in public health, or, that kind of thing where you start to get really interesting and innovative ideas coming through.
And a major part of your work is simply developing the collaborative strategy. What you have a process for doing that? I think the annual meeting you have is a key event in that.
Yeah, I mean, we make up the process every time because it's never right. So it's actually on my list. I've been like, oh man, we have these 5 strategic priorities right now. And yeah, so we survey our members, we talk about them at the annual meeting, we different things that we do to make sure our members are able to develop these strategies, and then how do we actually make them actionable. That is I mean, that's just a big, that's a big piece of my work. And for folks who maybe are new to this work, I will just actually share a little secret that helped me so much, which is if you are working in systems and networks, you are never doing it right because everything is shifting. And so you are always like going too far on the relationship side or too far on the knowledge building side. And you're constantly going like this and trying to get it right. So just, I will just share that when I realized that, it made me feel a lot better about myself. So.
Thanks, that's great. Information is a big part too, just being an info hub, connecting communications.
I would say that. I mean, yes, we do a lot of learning. We have webinars, we have monthly calls, like for people who are working on transportation, what's the issue that you need to learn about? But the focus is not really on the information itself. The focus is more on the connections between people and the ability to make meaning out of information, and kind of really just to slow people down and give them time to do more than hear information, but to really think about it. So
wonderful. But your big issues or roles are around collaborative action enabler, and then all of this produces the climate solution.
well,
So when you talk about collaborative action, what does that mean?
Yep, it can mean a lot of different things. So I mentioned that we are an intermediary, so we grant funds out to our members. So we have state-based things that people will work on, and then there's more regional things across the state. And then within our hubs, within our strategic priorities, people take different actions. So I mean, there's like kind of a million examples probably I could give of collaborative action. But again, the difference with ReAMP is that collaborative action is never really intended as a coalition. It's more intended as ongoing action to see what works, to learn from what we're doing, to feed that back into the next thing. So it's not like, a coalition is usually, hey, here's the problem. Here's the group of people who need to come together to solve that problem. This is more like, hey, here's our strategic priority. Here's one of the important things we need to figure out on the strategic priority. Let's do that. And now let's figure out what the next thing is, if that makes sense.
Great. Johnny, if we can return to Gail, I'd like to open it up to any questions or inquiries you have or comments. But first of all, just one question is, can you give an illustration of how ReAMP has made a difference? Like, how do you think of your success?
Yeah. So I will just share that culturally, people from the upper Midwest never like to talk about things they're doing well. So I'm always like, well, no, let me tell you about all the mistakes we made. But we've actually done a lot of great things. And one example, I mean, sort of the example that always gets held up as like the big victory we had early on was, if you remember those 100+ coal plants that were going to be built out across the Midwest, we stopped them all. We stopped all of them. And they thought it could not be done. And the first one that we did proved the concept. The second one was like, oh, that wasn't just a one-off. And then we figured out how to do it. we stopped all of those coal plants. So that is like one of the really, really huge things.
Wonderful. Any questions, or I guess one of them's around financing, perhaps. How do you keep going financially?
Through foundations primarily. We get some individual contributions, but it's all pretty much philanthropy.
And they stick with you?
Yeah, I mean, we've had funders come and go, for sure. We've lost a few big ones, we've gained a few big ones, and but yeah, I mean, we're doing okay. It is hard though. I will say it is hard for people to really understand this model, because we're not about like, hey, you give us money and we'll return to you these policies having been done. I mean, we do some fundraising that's like that, but at our core, what we really want to do is fund the capacity for people to build relationships, to create strategy, and to build other kinds of capacity.
Can I ask how the net, I mean, you have regular meetings, it looks like. How does the network feedback? Because there's a lot of autonomy in the network.
Yeah.
And types of folk, some doing policy lobbying, some going to, state legislators, some presumably just getting out into the streets and pound for the thing. I mean, I can imagine just a whole gamut of things.
Mm-hmm.
How do people kind of report back on moving the collective strategy forward when you're kind of very dispersed across 9 states, you said, as well?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that we just let go of, because a lot of it is about the relationships people are forming with each other. And, obviously it would be wonderful if there was some central person who could metabolize all of that and cause everyone to learn. That was actually the original idea when I was hired, that I was going to be that person who would learn all the lessons and put them back out there. But it just doesn't work like that. I mean, people learn by doing, and it was great if I wrote a report and said, hey, people in Ohio, guess what they did in Iowa? But it doesn't really work like that, right? So instead, like, hey, people in Iowa, may I introduce you to people in Ohio, and you guys can talk to each other? And I don't necessarily know what always comes out of those conversations. So really the value is when people stay in the network long enough to start influencing the overall culture, because what they have in their head, it does contribute very, very much to the network overall. And obviously I do try to learn things as well, and but.
Maybe there we can go. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Can I ask you also about the capacities that you need to build for being, because you were telling us knowledge is important, but it's not the crucial one. But then you talked about flexibility. I heard from you that you have this, you don't worry, or at least it doesn't worry you that much if you fail, this, and you're very flexible. So can you tell us a little bit about that learning of your capacities, of what you became in these years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we did develop six values that ReAMP holds, and those are community, collaboration, equity, justice, scientific rigor, and oh, I'm missing one obviously, but you get the idea. And so I think that was, we try to build the capacity for people to act in community, for people to analyze things, whether they're scientifically rigorous, and whether they really have good metrics on equity and so forth. We try to help them build those capacities. Also, I think one of the biggest things is the capacity to slow down and to say not yet. And then we find that once we've slowed down enough that we have people moving together, then we can go quite quickly.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Gail. I'd like to wrap up by just showing a couple more pictures I got drawn of what you're doing. We do this web crawl mapping, which is about the systems that you're working in. So all of these nodes here are particular websites. You can see ReAMP is down in the bottom right-hand corner. And this is the system from a web crawl point of view that you're working into and that you're part of. And
that's interesting.
ACEEE is the big one here. Just people are going to wonder what that is. Can you just explain?
Yeah, that's the American Council on an Energy Efficient Economy. I'm delighted to see they're so big. They're like, nobody ever talks about the ACEEE. That's awesome. They're great.
Great. And the next map here is what we call an EgoNet. So this shows all of those that are members of ReAMP. And in the, so you have how many, 146 members, or was it?
A little less than that, I think. Yeah.
Okay. And the center is just some that I had done a particular crawl on, and it shows the connections between them. For instance, you can see up there, the Joyce Foundation is in the center upper part there, and it has numerous connections. So it's a way to understand the connections between your members. This is what that center part is connections between your members. And it's, of course, just a web crawl picture of the world. So it has all of those limitations about who has hyperlinks between whom.
I see.
But that's,
yeah, we do our own mapping internally that shows how people are connected. That's actually, it's been fairly useful, I think, you know, how people are in the same spaces. And we actually do, I don't know if you all have ever used something called SumApp. It's a way for people to actually assess their own quality of relationship with other people in the network. But that's for people, not organizations, because we just reached a point, even though our member unit is organizations, we just reached a point where we said, mostly who has relationships with each other is human beings. Sometimes organizations do truly have relationships, but mostly it's human beings who have relationships.
that's a wonderful note to wrap up on, because in many organizations, people say that organization isn't interested in this. And I find that you can usually find somebody in the organization who's interested in you. And then you start looking at somebody who is not just interested, but has some network themselves. And they have a network that they can work, and they have some legitimacy so that people don't think of them just as crazy, but they've actually got a network that thinks, yeah, this is good. And they have a little bit of time that they can contribute to the networking. So that's the core of organizing. I think this is, in many ways, I say this is all about community organizing.
I agree with that. Yep.
Thank you so much, Gail. It's great to see you again and
Likewise.
have this update on where you are.
All right. Have a great lunch, everybody. Steve knows how to get hold of me if you need to reach out. Take care.
Thank you so much. It was really
Thank
fun.
you.
Take care. Bye-bye. Ciao.
Thanks, Gail. Wow, so there we are. We have just completed our first climb up this up this mountain. We're going to reconvene at 2 o'clock Eastern in order to continue our base camp. We're going to go right into base camp 2. So we'd look forward to seeing all of you back, and we'll continue our mapping after lunch. All good? Anything else?
So this means it's 1 hour and 15 minutes, right?
So it's an hour. So thank you for that, Allie. It's an hour and 15 minutes. Yes.
Awesome. Great. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
See you back here.
Later, bye.
Bye.